Woodworking is an incredibly versatile and powerful skill set. Humans have been building wooden structures for literal millennia. Even in the age of steel and concrete, wood has remained one of the fundamental building blocks of constructed landscapes. A basic understanding of woodworking will demystify the inner workings of the objects and structures which we all rely on, and put you in a unique position to respond to the needs of your community. Woodworking is for everybody, and I want to show you how to get started. Okay, first we're going to need some tools. I tried my best to make this as accessible as possible, but if you don't have the means or time to gather all this stuff, most cities will have a free tool lending library. I'll put a link in the description. We're going to buy almost everything used, and we're going to try to spend less than $100. I was able to pick up the vast majority of this stuff on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, but you should also check out local secondhand shops and scrap yards. We'll need to go to the hardware store for things like glue and sandpaper, and there's one tool that I recommend buying new. We'll talk about that later. And the grand total was $84. Now, I'm going to be building a simple, sturdy table. I'm only going to be using tools from our toolkit that we just put together, and I'm going to be building it exclusively out of reclaimed materials. Feel free to follow along, but I'm not going to be providing any detailed measurements or plans. I want to show you how to use all of these tools safely and effectively, and I want to inspire you to design and build your own furniture at home. The first tool we're going to be working with is a circular saw. This saw can make any straight cut quickly and safely. Just don't cut through the cord. I've done it before. It's no fun. Before we get started, just a quick word about safety. You're going to want some sort of mask or respirator, some sort of hearing protection. Just earplugs from the drugstore will work, and either your regular prescription glasses or preferably safety glasses. And if you live in an apartment, please do not cut or sand while you're inside. There are a few other things later in the process that you can do in your apartment, but for this stuff, take it out to the sidewalk out front. I'm working with some reclaimed plywood. I'm going to throw it up on my sawhorses with a 2x4 underneath each side. You'll see why in a moment. This stuff is absolutely filthy. Judging by the date code, it was manufactured in the late 60s. I'm going to mark the center with my carpenter square, align my saw with the center line, and clamp a ruler down to the plywood to hold the saw straight as I make my cut. I'm setting the blade so that it won't cut through the 2x4s. That way they'll hold the two sheets and prevent them from falling off the sawhorses after we make our cut. Now I'm going to glue both halves together to make my tabletop. Make sure you spread the glue out nice and evenly. And then you're going to want to grab all of the heavy stuff you have around the house. Paint cans, weights, chainsaws, big lights, whatever you have. 24 hours later, back on the sawhorses, and I'm going to use the circular saw to cut the ends off just to make them nice and clean and flush. Let's talk about hand planes. A hand plane is basically a sharp chisel that's held at a perfect angle by a metal body with a flat sole. The cutting edge extends out of the bottom of the plane, and when you run it over a piece of wood, it'll take off a very thin shaving from the surface. The plane that I'm using is super common on the used market, and you can get it really cheap. The problem is you're not going to be able to cut anything unless you sharpen it. Now, sharpening planes is not difficult. It's actually really simple, but it does require a bit more of an in-depth explanation than I can provide in this overview video. The only thing you need that's not already in our toolkit is a piece of glass, which I found by the dumpster at my apartment building. Check the additional resources section at the end of the video. I'll include a great guide to sharpening. Folks who have been working with hand planes for a long time will check to make sure their iron is sharp enough by shaving off a little bit of the hair on their arm. I don't really grow any hair on my arm, so I had to use my leg. Plus, I don't get to show off my tattoo very often. A much safer way of checking to make sure your iron is sharp enough is by clamping a piece of scrap wood to your bench and slowly advancing the iron out of the plane body until you get a nice, clean shaving. Now that our plane's nice and sharp, we're going to use it to smooth and flatten our tabletop on both sides. It's pretty amazing how quickly this old plywood cleans up with a nice sharp plane. Now I'm scraping off all of the dry glue from the edges that we didn't cut with our circular saw and applying a nice subtle chamfer. Next, grab a scrap of plywood and your spray adhesive. Glue down a sheet of 220 grit sandpaper and cut off any excess. Now we have a flat sanding block that we can use to make our surface velvety smooth and ready for finish. Now I'm gonna flip it over and repeat all of those steps on the other side. Now check it out. If you live in a small apartment and you don't have anywhere to store your sawhorses, just use them as your table legs. Pull them out when you're ready to do some woodworking. I guarantee you there's some fancy design store selling a table that looks exactly like this for $5,000. For everybody else, we're gonna need to build some table legs and a skirt, which is just a set of supportive braces that go in between the legs to make the whole thing more sturdy. First, I cut some 3-inch strips out of my sheet of plywood and glued them together. My legs are 3 strips thick, and my support pieces are 2 strips thick. Next, let's talk about pocket hole jigs. A pocket hole jig will allow us to drill a hole at a 15-degree angle and then drive a special screw through that hole and into another piece of wood. This is going to create a super strong joint without having to buy any other fancy tools or cut any fancy joinery. This is the only tool in our kit that I recommend you buy new, and the reason is this is a great tool and people hold on to it. They're really hard to find on the used market. Luckily, most tool rental libraries also carry one of these in stock. I'm using pocket holes to join my legs to my skirt and the entire assembly to the bottom of the table. I'm going to use my carpenter's square to make sure that everything's coming together nice and square and even. Some attention to detail here really pays off in the end. All right, and there we go. Now we're done with assembly and ready for finishing. There are very few brands that I'm loyal to, but tried and true wood finishes is definitely one of them. This stuff is all natural, sustainably sourced, food safe, and it couldn't be easier to apply. Let's see how it turned out. I have to say, I'm pretty proud of how this table came out. I think it looks great. It feels great when you run your hand over it. It's nice and sturdy. This would be a fantastic first woodworking project and something that you could actually use for years to come. Let's talk about some other resources you should check out if you're looking to get started. There are 2 YouTube channels that have really helped me take things to the next level. The first is Rex Kruger. He made that video about sharpening planes that I was talking about earlier. Most of his videos deal with working with hand tools and making really amazing things on a budget. Definitely check him out. And the second is my favorite YouTube channel of all time, C. Jane Drill. Leah, the host of this channel, just has such an incredible amount of wisdom. I've learned so many little tips and tricks from this channel that I use every single day. If you take anything away from this video, check out Leah on C. Jane Drill. You will learn so much. I hope this video has shown you that it's possible to start woodworking right now with a very low budget, no dedicated space, and no prior experience. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me directly on Instagram. And thanks so much for watching.